Wanguhu is an expert on these matters. He's our guest. We are going to be discussing privatization. Charles, good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Good to see you again after a while. And I know you've been in this particular space of public policy and policy on particularly matters of our oil sector for a while. Now you're talking about privatization of Kenya's pipeline. So we'll hear your thoughts about that shortly. But first, Janet is going to give you the day's quote.
Yes, the day's quote is by Wallace Chuma from Zimbabwe. In 2022, he said, "Democracy is not inherited. It must be negotiated every day between the people and power." Yep. What are your thoughts? Do we negotiate democracy as much as we pretend to?
I think I'll link it to another quote which says that the price for democracy is permanent civic vigilance. So at every point you have to just constantly be at it. You cannot lay on your laurels and say, okay, now we've achieved it. It's one of those things that you can never say, okay, it's done.
Yeah, that's good.
You have to keep pushing for it.
Yeah.
Pushing. But also it's negotiation for me. I think the word negotiation sticks out for me. That is not a demand, it's a negotiation. So it's a give and take.
Yeah.
So that means that the people and the power, you have to reach a level where you're both working at equilibrium. Power may come in and wanting to dictate. It shouldn't. It should negotiate. That also means that the people also cannot dictate to power. They also need to come and say, okay, so power.
Let's negotiate power.
It's so interesting how that first half of the statement, I was like, yes, and then the second half.
You're like, wait. Oh my gosh.
Unfortunately, that's what a negotiation is.
It's both Denise and put all your cards on the table. Charles, do we have all our cards on the table when it comes to privatization? This new push to privatize parastatals.
I think we are falling short of the difficult conversations that we need to have in terms of what is a longer term Kenya national project, right? And so we get caught up in this sort of very short-term thinking of, okay, yes, so we privatize KPC, but what does that actually mean when you privatize, right? Because parastatals, there's a reason why parastatals were set up, right? They serve an economic and social function that government sees, to prevent the people from being, because the private sector can also, people talk about efficiency for private sector, but there's also the flip side to that, which is they are also maximizing profits, which can also lead to, sort of monopolistic tendencies, which can impact countries. And so a lot of countries set up these parastatals with that in mind, to serve an economic and social function. So when you privatize, then you have to ask yourself that question. So what happens to that function that it was serving?
Right.
Yeah.
What does happen? There's been the push, of course, to have several state entities get privatized. A lot of them for not making enough money, for basically making losses over the years. Some have been merged. A few state entities have been merged. But let's start with Kenya Pipeline as the case study. What Kenya Pipeline does, why it exists, and what privatization could look like. I think it's one of the more profitable parastatals, for sure. What does privatization look like, and what impact could it have on Kenyans?
Yeah, so I think, and rightly so, we are speaking about Kenya Pipeline because it's the cash-rich out of the ones which have been proposed, right? But there's also Kenya Seed in there, and there's also new KCC.
Kenya Seed will come back to. I find that one.
Yes.
When Eric was saying, we've discussed it before.
And so when you're looking at the purpose of Kenya Pipeline, there's this saying that says that you don't truck if you can rail, and you don't rail if you can pipeline. So pipeline is the most efficient way of moving fuels, right? And so that's why Kenya Pipeline is so strategic in that space. And then you have about 1,340 kilometers of pipeline.
How many?
1,340 odd, or a bit more than that, because of line 2. And so it remains one of the bigger national assets because it's from east to west, so from Mombasa all the way to Kisumu to Eldoret. So you have all this sort of interconnected pipeline, and it's one of the few remaining national assets. Because you also have to remember that now that we've done devolution, there's very few sort of these remaining national assets. And so we can't think of Kenya Pipeline as just sort of its immediate, sort of, it's now just transporting fuel. along that 1,340 pipeline, you also have the Wayleaf that's there that is strategic, right? So, for example, if you're trying to lay fiber optic in this country, you go to Nakuru, you'll be charged 200 shillings per meter. You go to Mombasa, it's 150. I think Nairobi is about 100. So there's just sort of all of that inconsistency. So if you're having a national project, then you need these national assets that have these Wayleafs and things that already existed, so that you have a more longer term view of it. Because if you look at the future is actually not transportation of fuel, it'll be transportation of electrons, for example, because of the global energy transition that's happening, right? So you need to start reimagining, okay, what does a reimagined Kenya pipeline look like? Would it be charging infrastructure, for example, for electric vehicles all across that line, so that you're looking at, this is what a future company for Kenya can be.
So the mindset has to, in fact, I was going to ask, and maybe you can still use Kenya pipeline as an example. So the supporters say, this kind of privatization move will bring efficiency. Critics are like, it's stripping away, the element of either proximity or just being able to have it part of what the public can enjoy. So where does the truth lie in between that? Are the critics right? Are the supporters right? And using the example that you've just used, where does the truth lie then?
And that's what I mean. I mean, we have to, in terms of looking at policy, you just have to rigorously look at it. Because so the people who are against it, for example, would argue that, Kenya Pipeline in the last year has given government dividends of, 7 billion odd, right? But then they forget that there was a presidential directive that mandated parastatals to release 80% of their profits, right? So that's what's increased that in the last year. So you can't delink some of these arguments. And so I think, and having sadly studied law as well, you can make an argument for anything. And so the problem is that we need to have this national conversations where we rigorously look at these policies and say, okay, is this for the betterment of the country? And so with Kenya Pipeline, you look at it and the revenues and you argue, yes, government will be able to, I'm not sure they'll be able to realize the 100 billion that they're seeking. I think it's
from the sale.
From the sale. It's a bit unrealistic. But then how do you take that now? If you've given up 60% of the pipeline, then you have to look at, okay, so what are the cons against that, right? Okay. So you're not in control of that. And if one of Kenya's biggest advantages is its transport corridor, right? And its access to the countries that are landlocked. So that's one of our strategic sort of pros within that. So now if you lose control of that, so if a private company or takes up a bit of that and increases the cost, then what if countries start looking for alternatives, and we lose that strategic advantage that we have? And I think those are some of the things that you need to think about.
Show me how we'd lose it.
Sorry?
Show me how we'd lose those advantages. So if government retains 40% ownership of this entity, right? Then what exactly would we be losing? So Charles and Mariam and Eric are shareholders in Kenya Pipeline, just like they're shareholders in KenGen or Kenya Power. How would they now start taking control of Kenya's infrastructure?
Yeah. So again, like I said, and using those different arguments. So you look at the last year, the reason Kenya Pipeline's dividend to government increased was because there was a directive mandating that, right? So first you lose that, right? So then you
lose the power to dictate.
Now Eric decides, Eric and the fellow shareholders decide what happens with this company, what is strategic for them. And for them, I mean, a lot of it is short term, right? If I'm a CEO sitting in a company, I only have a short-term view of things. I don't have a long-term national outlook of saying, this is how Kenya remains competitive within the next 10, 15 years. I have no interest in that case, because my bonuses and things will be linked to my immediate priorities at that moment.
Not an entirely true argument, though, Charles.
Yeah.
As an investor, you have both short-term, medium and long-term interest in an organization, in a company. You want dividends.
Yes.
You want the bottom line. You want this company to be profitable, so that it gives you a dividend.
Yes.
You do not want necessarily that it gives you a dividend and then you sell out, you get out of this. If it's a good investment, you put money for the long term. So that then you're also strategically aligned for the long-term growth of this entity. And the 40% shareholder, who's the government, is the one who is looking at, yes, part of dividend, but legacy.
That's, I mean, And again, like I said, everyone can make a good argument for or against. If you look at the banking sector, for example, where banks owned a lot of their buildings, for example, and then they started selling them, right? You sell that, you put it on your balance sheet, you prop up your balance sheet, it looks brilliant. You justify, bigger bonuses and that kind of thing. So it's all about the incentives that will be created there. And that's what I mean by losing control of that particular aspect. So it could turn out that, yes, I mean, you get a solid Kenyans who are thinking long-term about the future of the country and think, but there's also the risk that you don't.
Yeah.
This 60%, is there a chance that it could go to one institutional investor? Is that possible?
No, I mean, if it's going to be listed as an IPO, then it goes to the market and everyone decides what they want to do.
So then, if it's going to market, everybody gets a piece of KPC, then that means 40% will still be majority shareholding, right? Then... technically, right? So which brings me back to Eric's point of, the loss of control then really isn't there if you still have a majority shareholder who's 40% of whatever this is. Anyone else coming in at 5, 3, 2, 10,
like the single largest shareholder will be one entity called the government of Kenya.
So the strategic interests could still be protected. No?
Yes, I mean, yes and no. Because you're talking about control, right? So effective control of the company, I mean, at 40%, you don't really have effective control. Yes, you have some directors.
You have majority shareholding, but not,
You have majority shareholding, but if you look at the director level and the strategy, in terms of getting the strategy, yes, you have a say. You have a say, but you don't have a majority say, right?
True.
And once you list it on the market, so if you look at all the previous, like KenGen, once it was listed, so depending on the price that it comes at, then you can get a second person who now mops up all of that, right? So if you come in and make a higher offer, then you can mop up a lot of that and have, effective control of the company. And knowing that if you own more than 30%, you can actually, make a bid for the entire.
I want to go back a bit. Who determines which parastatals are up for sale?
So I mean, the Privatization Commission is entitled to, putting out, just like they put now the notice. And I think if you look at the ones they put out now, Kenya Seed, KCC, and all of that, it's Privatization Commission that does that, going through the process through Parliament as well.
We've been here before, right?
Yeah.
Uchumi, are there any? I'm trying to name the ones where we've been. My point is, are there any lessons that can be learned in terms of how it's happening this time going forward, from the lessons?
And learned, and maybe even Thread, because you used KenGen as an example.
Right.
KenGen still
Kenya Airways.
Kenya Airways
seem to be doing okay. Allegedly.
Reportedly.
Well, I mean, I don't know that the Kenyan taxpayer would say Kenya Airways is a success story, given the amount of money we've been pumping into them.
Very true. But this year they did show the first glimpse of hope with recording a profit for the first time in a long time. But I get, for the last few years, it's been the absolute ghetto. Maybe KenGen, Kenya Power.
And again, I mean, it's all about the strategy. If you look at Kenya Power and how it links to everything else, right? And so even if you look at the ones which are being privatized, like KICC, so KICC, Kenya Airways, you have this sort of ecosystem that builds around it. And then, so it becomes a strategic asset that you're saying, this is such a strategic asset that you don't necessarily want to just leave it. And I think, and that's the whole point around having parastatals. If you look at the National Oil Company, again, there was a strategy behind the initial setup, right? It was supposed to prevent sort of the collusion that was happening between the other companies and setting prices, right? Before we ended up now with price controls. So the National Oil Company, for example, was set up. They had a policy, for example, that they were to be allocated all the oil that came in that they'd be able to sell. Didn't work out, given, right? But again, there was a social...
That was the thinking.
There was a thinking there that we need to protect the Kenyans from this sort of cartel-like behavior of the oil marketers, right? And that was the purpose of that.
So I'm wondering if there's any security interests of ours that could potentially be compromised with the privatization of KPC, because that's the first thing that came to mind. And that's why Kenya Seed is also quite sensitive to me. But that one is quite obvious. It's glaring. It's right there. It's your food sovereignty. With Kenya Pipeline, what concerns like that exist?
I mean, again, with Kenya Pipeline, you have to think of Kenya's... So even if you look at Kenya's map at night, right? Our whole, you will just see a corridor from the coast to the border. That's where all the lighting is. That's where all our towns are. So our corridor is one of the most strategic assets for the country, to our hinterland, right? And so that's one of the things you have to think about Kenya Pipeline. If you're giving it up, what does that mean, for example, for that? And I think that's just sort of the biggest case against it.
Yes.
Like I said, I mean, there are also cases for where you say, we can free it from the patronage networks and all of that by privatizing it, right? And so that's the thing. I mean, my basic premise is that we have to, as Kenyans, look at the future and then integrate that to the current privatization.
And I want to go into the future in just a bit, because you gave like really good examples at the beginning of the potential of the infrastructure that Kenya Pipeline sits on and what it could be used for. So we could be letting go of something super profitable. But there's the question of the cost of fuel. Would that be potentially affected in any way by the privatization of KPC?
Again, I mean, if you're seeking to maximize on your profits because you've gone private, then, I mean, the biggest case is just to increase to increase the storage fees around the depots. They have a depot in Eldoret, in Kisumu, in Mombasa, in Nairobi. And so, again, so it's just about maximizing. So if you maximize the profits, then, there is that risk.
There's a direct impact. However, there is also the other side of regulation.
Yes.
Right? That there's a regulator who sets the tariff. And that's the EPRA. EPRA sets the tariff for how much are your pipeline going to charge. This is how much you can charge. This is how much, even in power, this is how much Kenya Power you can buy power for. Or you can sell power for this much. So there's the other side of a government entity that is regulating and saying, you are not going to run amok. You have to justify the costs of this. So maybe the converse of that would be that if this entity wants then to maximize on the profit, then it minimizes on costs, and that means a benefit because it's efficiency. So the shareholders will be saying we want more money. The directors at the board will be saying we need this thing to work. Then the management will have to think, how do we make this pipeline more efficient? This is how much we are charging. We've got to reduce the cost. We are losing so much in terms of the thickness of our pipe.
Leakages,
we have so much leakages and so on and so forth. So we cut on that. So it improves on efficiency, which doesn't necessarily have to be a privatization. It's just a management. It's a management issue. Yeah. You talked about the looking at the present and the future, and I'd like to look at globally. How do countries manage those strategic national assets, pipeline, power, and so on and so forth? Water, seeds. Right? How do other countries actually manage these things? Are they 100% state-owned?
Yeah, I mean, not always, right? And so different countries, take a different approach to it. I think the firstly is just to sort of say, you have to identify, okay, so like a company like KPC, like I mentioned, the first is a strategic interest in terms of Kenya's regional competitiveness, right? Given that you're in a race that we lost the crude oil pipeline to Tanzania, right, which is supposed to pass through Kenya, right? So that's the first element. You look, okay, now that's strategic, and then now you look at the national interest, right? So we have a national interest in, for example, keeping fuel at a reasonable rate, given the knock-on effects it has on inflation and thing in the economy. So again, that you're looking at that as that sort of social element. So other countries, what they've done is that having identified that strategy, then they decide whether they want to give it up to private sector or just open it up for private sector investment, right? Because you also have to remember that government has, because of government is able to offer guarantees, for example, that they're able to access financing. And so I agree with you. It's not necessarily that privatization will achieve all these things that you're trying to achieve. You can achieve them without privatizing the asset. I mean, and that's just a possibility.
Are there sectors that shouldn't be privatized, like health, like
defense?
No, I'm curious.
Defense and security.
Defense and security, health. I don't know. since other things can just be privatized, I'm sure somebody can, people can make an argument for and against for anything.
By
They
the
could
way,
make a case for.
by the way, remember, we are not privatizing the sector.
Yeah.
It's just one company.
Yeah.
It does not
fair enough.
mean that we should not and cannot, allow another pipeline to operate in this company to operate in this country. Just
Yes.
the same way we keep saying, we don't have to have just the one power distributor.
Right.
We can have other power distributors.
Right.
Jano and Eric can form a power distribution company today, and the push is we should be allowed to actually get into that market.
But that's one. I'm just looking at others.
Are you asking whether that is also right? Like should,
Or whether the same can be said for a company in another sector, like health.
health is already privatized.
I know, but should it be?
Yeah.
Should it be?
I would say, again, it's just about the strategic priorities for the country. So if you look at our budget, our budget's been growing, exponentially, right? In 2021, our budget was 3 trillion. Now it's, it's 4.3 to 4.2 trillion, right? Where have we gotten that extra 1 trillion in terms of that allocation within that time, right? And so then you look at, so the other asset that's being privatized is it KLB, the Kenya Literature Bureau, which is, and then you look at that, and we're spending 700 billion on education, and then so you say, so this becomes a strategic asset for maybe like textbooks and things, because that's what government is going to be spending money on, and so we have to look at the interlinkages of these, and you just can't look at them in isolation and say, okay, you're losing money here, right? So if you look at the numerical machining complex, which is another one on the chopping board, if we're looking at
what does the numerical machining complex do?
Yeah, I mean, they've been set up for a while. I think maybe Eric might remember it from back in the day with the initial car, the Pioneer. Was it the Pioneer?
The
car?
Pioneer.
Yeah. But again, if you look at industries that are growing in Kenya now, if you look at two-wheelers, the electric two-wheelers. Now, if you look at the Bolts and all the bikes, all of them are electric, right?
Scooters and...
a lot of them are being assembled locally, right? So NMC becomes strategic in that sense. If you can make it operate,
make it viable.
Yes.
That means bringing capital into it without necessarily asking Mariam to pay more taxes, so that you can now go and start doing experiments with kids there making cars.
And the case for that is privatization.
Making experiment. We have to take a break. I like how he spoke to the fact that you can't look at it isolated. I don't know that I thought of that, because otherwise it can seem very linear and one-dimensional, but looking at it holistically. But we're debunking privatization with Charles Wanguhu, policy analyst. I can see some feedback already coming in. We have people like Emmanuel Templar, Charles Ndungo, Samson Abok. We'll come back and share those and see if Charles can also speak to them. It's coming up to 8:30. We'll be back after this break. Charles Ndungo says KPC is currently government-run. The haphazard way fuel prices are determined is there for all to see. I start to imagine what will happen when it's privatized. Emmanuel Templar, privatization is a good idea for loss-making parastatals that aren't strategic. However, because the government is broke, their privatization is primarily driven by revenue generation and not long-term strategy. Charles can...
So that was part of my question. What informed the need to privatize the most profitable?
The fattest.
Yes, the fattest cow.
Yeah.
Lowest hung. I mean, what do you take to the market?
No, but
watoto wanarudi shule Januari, Mariam.
Okay.
Ni December. Okay. Wanataka kwenda kwa soko ndio upate pesa kupeleka watoto shule. Will you take the thinnest goat or will you take the fattest goat?
I'll take the fattest goat for sure. But again, when this privatization conversation started, it sounded like a way of almost shedding off like excess weight.
Yes.
Which then would have been the parastatals that aren't making money. It's either you merge, put them into one, or you sell, or you disband completely.
I think it was informed by those two. So one, there is a need to find other ways of raising local revenue to finance government.
Yeah.
Taxes, we've hit a certain point. In the debt market, we've hit a certain level. So where else are we going to get money? Okay. If we continue investing in this thing, we can force them to pay 80% of all their money back into the but we're impacting their operations.
Yeah.
So one of the things is, if we went to the market, we can get a huge chunk of this cash into government. Mwai Kibaki did that when he came into office. He went into privatization. He raised capital through the market. Second, because that's the whole thing about whether going to the market. One of the things is raising capital.
Yeah.
Second, and this was even started early in the Kibaki years, is looking at running an efficient government. We have all these very many parastatals.
Yeah.
Some of them have, because of IFC and the World Bank and the structural adjustment programs of the 90s, some of them we just started abandoning them.
Yeah.
So we have state entities where we send money every month to pay salaries, but we don't send money to make them operate. So they're just, people turn up to work, they go back home, these entities are not working. A task force was established by Uhuru Kenyatta, and it was chaired by Senior Counsel Abdulkadir Mohammed. He was the president's legal advisor at that point. And they looked at this entire privatization thing. They did a report. Uhuruto took the report, looked at it, they were like, they kept it, they never worked on it. Ruto again came and they said, let's review these things. And they discussed it at cabinet. What was our cabinet meeting? I think it was in Kakamega. We talked about it. And they said, so this is the list of the private companies that we are going to privatize. And these are some of the reasons. Some of these ones we are merging, how many entities in tourism, collapse them into one. These others go straight into the market. They're performing. We don't need to shut it down, but this can generate for us some revenue. So that was the thinking.
Okay, so it was both ways, two-prong, fair. Going back to Charles.
Yeah.
When you look at, I was actually threading and trying to see best and worst case scenarios across the world. Nigeria came up as, well, not the best case scenario as far as privatization is concerned. And then it's reflected in the cost of fuel for a country that produces oil. It's crazy, but there's also best case scenarios elsewhere. Chad, I saw a few. I'm just trying to think, how do we if we are privatizing, so how do we then foolproof ourselves from worst case scenario? And in the example of Nigeria, the issues are maintenance, vandalism, governance failure, right? It's not fully privatized, but Niger Delta suffers chronic spills, vandalism, and sabotage. Okay. There's also community grievance issues, security issues, all of those. So privatization did not substitute for weak state capacity. Right. That's worst. Not worst, but the other side of the spectrum. Best case is places like Chad and Cameroon, where they have a concession model. It's built and operated by a private consortium of Exxon, Chevron, and Petronas. Those are some of the biggest oil names in the world, right? With strong World Bank involvement and strict contractual safeguards tied to social and environmental requirements. So that's, how do we foolproof ourselves from those downfalls now that we're going that route?
Yeah, and so, okay, and the challenge that that you're highlighting first is that it's also very difficult to compare crude oil pipelines and now products pipelines, right? Because product pipelines also have very small margins, and so it's very different from when now you own the resource and you're going to sell the resource, as opposed to now you're bringing in oil that's been refined elsewhere, and then now you're distributing it, and now with very little margins.
Just a transport corridor.
And I think, like Eric was saying, EPRA also tells you can only make this margin, right? And so we have to be careful if those margins remain. So if EPRA maintains those tight margins, then where the cost going to be cut, right? And so you have to ensure that your regulator is much better off. So if you look at Kenya Pipeline, there have been spills. There's a village in Ukambani who are still suffering from that, where the water was actually impacted by an oil spill from leakage from the pipeline, right? And so those are some of the things that we need to be careful about. That what's the balance that you're saying? That if you're saying you have to increase your revenues and you can't increase your margins, then where do you cut costs, right?
I'd actually not thought about that because regulation is supposed to be the answer, but if you regulate and someone has dividends to pay out and shareholders to please, they will cut corners somewhere.
And if you cut the budgets for the regulators, you're also now restricting them from being able to achieve that. So you have to have that balance where you say, okay, we can increase some regulatory capacity at that cost. So that's the cost benefit that you're looking at, that you're saying if you increase regulation, then you can go more private so that the interests are still protected.
Yes.
Now, going to Eric's point around selling the fattest goat, I think that's one thing we have to really look at, because there's only, like I said, there's only so many assets left, right?
We have so many goats.
So you can't keep saying that every year you'll increase your budget.
We have few goats, Eric.
So you can't keep increasing your budgets. We have a spending problem. And I think we just really need to address, the two things that we need to address is that spending problem, but also our politics, right?
Yes.
So now we are coming from we've been for the last 17 years, we've been doing coalition governments, right?
Yeah.
And those coalition governments, just to be blatant about it, they split what they call the spoils, the ministries, depending on their strength. And what's their strength? So you're seeing the ministries with strong parastatals who are cash rich, those are the ones now. That's how the splitting happens. If you have to just be realistic about
if you're the favorite of number,
then you get
that one.
And so that has an impact. We can't just keep doing the politics that we're doing, increasing our spending, our wastage as well, and then that politics. We just need to address. That's a bigger thing in the room that at some point we just have to.
At some point, or the point is now. I'm like, we're ready. I'm already seeing. So then, even based on that, then what's smarter? And this could be, I don't know, if Charles was to advise, isn't it then smarter to reform governance parastatals than selling them off entirely?
The report, and that's the thing. I also get tired. We can't do it. We are tired of doing reports. There's that parastatal report that was done then, identified all the issues around governance and because, like I said, if we're looking at them as patronage points, so then you have a whole board that's just patronage, and then including now, and then that board also appoints executive that is a sort of patronage based. Then the outcomes are just going to be clear. You can't do that and then now expect efficiently run parastatals. You will get that outcome of where now it'll just be patronage points.
What we need to fix is not necessarily even the governance; it's the politics.
Yeah, it goes back to that.
It's the politics that's leading us into that.
It goes back to that. Yeah.
I just want to look at the various privatizations that we've seen. So Mwai Kibaki came in, and we went to, first of all, splitting the power sector into the three and said, we generate, you transmit, you distribute. Okay? Initially, this whole...
ilikuwa tu Kenya Power?
Ilikuwa Kenya Power, ilikuwa...
Everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Alikuwa anatengeneza stima na nakuletea.
That's wild.
Then, so it was split like that. Kenya Power at that point was already a listed entity. Okay? So government has a shareholding, but it's also publicly listed. Then when we split it, so we are left now with Kenya Power, which is listed. Now we have Ketraco and Kengen, which are not listed. Government is like, because Ketraco is starting and we have all this work to do, we can't list it at this point. But Kengen, you already are inheriting, a lot of the dams are there and so on and so forth. Let's privatize. Kengen was privatized. Kengen IPO, successful.
It was.
Safaricom IPO as well. Safaricom by that time was government plus Vodafone. Is it Vodafone, Vodacom? I keep confusing those two.
Vodacom.
Yes.
At time but that one, Voda. Wow.
Voda.
Own this thing, and they're like, so we need to get in some money. The Kibaki administration is coming in. Walikuta only two bob. Walipata shilingi mbili. They're looking for money. So we saw the Safaricom IPO, successful. Kengen IPO, successful. Mumia's Sugar IPO, successful as well. And all these things were bringing money to the government. Now, if you look at those entities since then, the key ones, Safaricom and Kengen, would we say that we lost or we gained by privatizing, by doing the IPOs?
Again, I feel like I'm being devil's advocate because you've left a very good example there. So Safaricom was privatized. Telkom was also privatized.
Yeah, Telkom Kenya.
Telkom was privatized. They brought in a strategic investor.
Yeah,
look at
without IPO.
Yeah, without IPO. Yes. Look at those two outcomes, right? It's like, totally opposites, right? One is that, I don't say it's deathbed, but yeah, it's pretty much there. And one, striving, very active in actually, it's a huge chunk of our national
the largest
stock exchange
company in East Africa.
Expanded into Ethiopia, right? So it's again, we can't remove the factor of people and how people impact how these organizations go forward. And I think that's a sort of a critical point in terms of how you appoint people.
Can you imagine if Safaricom was not privatized or Kengen was not privatized? The chairman of Kengen board and the CEO of Kengen board would just be decided in a political meeting somewhere.
Yeah. I hear you.
Okay.
So here's the thing. I am straddling between these 2 points of view because, truthfully, with this KPC privatization, I don't see a why not.
Okay.
But to Charles's point, I see the larger picture and I see the problem of continuously privatizing state resources. There's only so much we have. We only have so many goats. If for every wedding you're giving, every daughter that wants to get married, there's dowry. At some point, right?
You run out of daughters. It's not just the goods.
The beautiful ones are not yet born. The beautiful ones. So I see. Wait, my point was, how do we decide what interests to strategically keep safe and keep, because I think it is very problematic and very capitalistic to then privatize almost everything. And then once you say, okay, it's 40% now, at some point in the future we could say, government doesn't need 40, we could do 20, and then all your oil is in private hands. It's a domino effect. So how do we decide when to draw the line genuinely and say these are interests that should be the ward of the state, and these are things that we could afford to make money off of, and like this, like that. And then we'll go into the question of the future and those potential future uses for Kenya Pipeline. But Janu, please go into the...
No, I think Charles Ndungo is echoing what Mariam is saying. You keep selling the fattest goat and do not fatten the rest. You end up having no goats to sell. My premonition is the rest of the goats will not be fattened. So it's similar. No, I was going to, Mariam's question I think is important. My mind when he started talking about privatization was what happens to workers during privatization. Just a sentence or two, Charles. I mean, that's what, is it a lot of layoffs? Is it positive? Is it negative? I'm just thinking about the workers.
I mean, I think the workers' union has already come out against the privatization. And again, I think the challenge that I have is that if you create these patronage points, and so now you have a lot of these patronage appointments, then of course they'll be against any privatization thing. And so I personally know my background is governance and human rights, and so I'm pro-workers and think. But at the same time, you have to say, if you have these top-heavy institutions that are largely just sort of patronage appointments, then you have to reform them as well, just to make them more competitive, right? Because again, if you look at the future, you might not be as strategic in the future. So you have to be like nimble and be able to shift. And I think that's what we're struggling with, especially in the energy transition, in terms of how do you make these organizations be able to be nimble enough to move with the changes that are happening globally to adapt.
It's breaking it down for them to understand. Because it is hard. It's hard for them to see bigger picture when they say, I'm insecure and I don't feel like this is the right move. Which you were asking.
Just basically, how do we decide what's important enough to be like, this needs controlling interest to be in the arms of government, and then this one, we could sell a little bit here, a bit there, make some money here, there.
I think like the average person, you get your salary and then now you budget with your salary, right? Government is like, they create the budget and then now try to work back in terms of how now we'll get that money. So, and that's how you end up saying, okay, no, we'll sell this one, we'll get 100 billion there, 50 billion here, and that, which just is not, just doesn't make any sense long term. We have to start living within our means. We can't just start saying that, oh, look, do we need a 4.3 trillion? There's so much wastage and that's happening, and we have to just really address that. We can't just keep saying that we'll keep selling just to maintain this lifestyle, right?
Oh my gosh. We have a lifestyle problem as a country.
We do.
It just, I'd not had it like that, but that's exactly it. That's why we're forever in
constantly
debt.
Live beyond our means.
All the time and keep doing it.
You talked about future ways in which you could use the wayleafs, you call them, of KPC. Tell us what a wayleaf is, how that could feed into transporting electrons, charging electric vehicles, because I'm thinking, if we do go into that, that could be a much fatter cash cow than the 100 billion that we could potentially get from the sale of this 60% of Kenya Pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, so the wayleaves, I mean, this is the basic way to explain it. And so if you look at KPC and Ketraco, I mean, they are the ones who have like the biggest kind of wayleaf all across the country because of the pipelines and also the transmission lines. So where the pipeline is laid, there's a wayleaf of a certain meterage
Kama
that you
kuna
can't
runoff area.
that you can't use anything, you can't build anything above it because obviously like you will impact the pipeline, right? And I was using it to also now talk about our politics, because we've changed now to devolution. So each county is trying to maximize
On its
its own revenues, right? And so having a national one, which you say, look, this is part of our national infrastructure, which is critical, then you're able to do, implement projects even faster.
Along that corridor.
Yeah. Because even now, if you try to do a road, there's always, before you get the permissions and everything, it's taking, 3, 4, 5 years to do any simple projects.
You have to compensate everyone, you have to do okay. So then if I'm looking at charging stations, then that Wayleaf is the next best place to put charging stations for electric vehicles.
Because for the pipeline, you have a pumping station after.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, so then you're able to.
I see how that works. Okay.
Remember though, some of these Wayleaves, they're not 100% owned by Kenya Pipeline. It's long-term leases. So you've done a lease with Jano, who owns this 100 acres, and I'm passing the pipeline along your land. So basically, we have entered into a long-term agreement that Jano, you shall not develop or sell off, or even if you sell off, then you have to let us know and let the buyer know that this area, there's a pipeline passing under, and we have access. We have unfettered access to this portion of your land. So Kenya Pipeline does not necessarily own that tract of land, not like Kenya Railways, which owns areas. It's like that. But like Charles is saying, I mean, this is we can do our cables, and in fact, Kenya Pipeline does that. They run some of the longest fiber optic cable network along the pipeline.
Along the pipeline.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
that's already one use case, right, for the Wayleaves. Now it's
part of their revenue streams.
Because they charge for, of course they charge for it.
Yes, part of Kenya Power's, Kenya Pipeline's revenue stream is that.
Let's go.
Kenya Power as well, and Ketraco. In fact, Ketraco, we were told here by the former CEO that what they're also charging on is we have a pylon. We can just create a line for you here, run your cable.
And then we charge you for it.
And that's the thing, I mean, because we also need to address the inequality across the nation. And so ensuring that, all parts of the country are, for example, covered with high-speed network fiber, or even, power, for example. I mean, these are things that we need to look at in terms of the long-term national Kenyan project, right? Which is now being impacted, obviously, like I said, in terms of devolution and counties. Right? So if you, like I said, if you're going to Nakuru wants to charge you 200, you're like, you look at the revenue and you're like, it makes no sense.
It doesn't add up.
Yeah, and that's why, again, going back to the point around parastatals, there's always an economic and social argument for why they were set up in the first place, where private sector might not necessarily
benefit
want to go because, again, it doesn't make sense for them. It's a government role. That's a government role to do that.
This is, it's very much, so we don't, sorry, Jano, but we don't think of like a pipeline as one of those things that's a social good almost, where it might not be profitable for the private sector. That's why it's supposed to be public transport, even though in Kenya it's not. It's because it's not supposed to necessarily make money for you.
It's for social
good. For social good or healthcare or education.
But No, I don't know whether Charles has already spoken to public debt, and maybe you have. I'm just wondering whether, again, does privatization really reduce public debt, or will you just end up having that legacy tax that you end up paying? What's the role in reducing public debt?
Of course, it has a short-term role, but again, the challenge is if you're only using it for breathing room, that now you sold an asset, you've paid, and that's given you more breathing room to just like borrow some more, then which other asset are you going to sell now? You're just sort of kicking the can down the road. And so it has to be more strategic in terms of saying we want to retire X, this debt, and then now, and be more strategic in how we spend the funds of these sales. We can't just put it back into the budget. That is just sort of an endless hole now.
I'm also looking at 100 billion in terms of like our budget numbers. It's a bit of a dot
in the ocean.
Yeah, unfortunate.
But during Kibaki's time, that was a third of the budget. I mean, during his first, that was a third of the budget.
So
it's just that in the last 20 years,
we have a lifestyle problem. Like you said, don't get.
I know 100 is a small 100 billion.
Imagine that's what it's come to. That's crazy. It was a third of Moi Kibaki's budget. That's up on your tuko. 100 billion or 4.3 trillion. But as we wrap up the conversation, perhaps let's thread through other parastatals that have been proposed for privatization, and your thoughts on those, starting with Kenya Seed Company.
Again, if you Kenya seed is so strategic. If you look at, in terms of agriculture is still about 22. It's gone down from 26 to about 22% of GDP, right? If you look at crops, then crops, it comes about 15% of GDP, right? So it's so strategic to ensure that you have a Kenya seed company that's functional, that's ensuring that, you know, good modern seed is getting to the farmers, right? And so for me, it's such a strategic company, which we just sort of neglect, that we don't just pay enough attention to. Yeah.
I think I also think, from the food sovereignty point of view, if you don't have your seeds, I found out there's repository of seeds somewhere in the Nordic countries where every country sends seeds, and I was like, okay, that's nice for the entire world, but then all other nations also keep now repositories of their seeds and things like that, and I'm like, okay, what happens when basically the future food of your nation is in private hands? I think that was for me like the biggest question with Kenya seed. Ilengine ilikuwa the other one to be privatized.
Oh, there's several.
Yes.
Including KICC.
Yes, KICC. Actually, that's ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
KICC.
KICC needs money to become a better conference facility.
You have to look at what are our neighbors doing. I just came last month from the Africa Climate Summit in Addis. Ethiopians have set up this huge conference center, very modern. You know, I think they had, was it over 25,000 delegates or something like that, right?
25,000.
And if you look at the conferencing, and it has hotels, all the infrastructure is there, and that feeds to the airline, right? So it makes it more strategic for these huge meetings.
True.
If you look at these, you talk about 25,000 delegates on average, even just the small spend that each of these delegates is
even
using
do it
to
at
get
$50 each. That's
Exactly.
massive.
It's huge, and so we have to say, okay, maybe KICC, it's not as modern and thing, but you have to look at it and say, is it still strategic within the broader picture?
And
right?
it is.
Yeah.
It is. Okay. Do we feel like it's debunked a bit more?
Yeah,
Shida
definitely.
ni trust. That's what we've
I think
concluded.
shida kubwa ni trust.
Ni trust, yeah.
And maybe also just looking at the various options and looking at the law and the privatization authority that is to be established, the various options of privatization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because when you think privatization, you're thinking, so there are some people who just think, wamechukua Kenya Pipeline, wakapatia mtu mwingine.
Yeah. That is what they understand.
That's their understanding.
Yeah.
So there is through, privatization through IPO in the market, but are there other ways of privatization?
Yeah.
And I mean, what are the pros and cons? Or is IPO the only way?
And the
in
bigger
law?
picture.
The bigger picture is the biggest learning, is bigger picture. Yes, thank you so much.
How many weddings shall we give goats for?
The wedding and goat analogy will stay.
Brilliant.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. But also think about it. So you have your goat, you're not actually selling off the goat. You're just saying, what do you call a billy goat? So I have a billy goat. So you need seed. I'm bringing the billy goat to you for a week.
Okay.
You pay me.
Oh.
I still own it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Dung, it's hit. Charles Wanguhu, policy analyst, debunking privatization, has been our guest. In the next hour, what is happening in Kiambu County? There's a health standoff. But the former governor will come and give us his take. That is James Nyoro, former governor of Kiambu County. Stay with us. It's coming up to 9 a.m. on Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time.